The topic of racism and oppression has always been a running theme in a lot of video games. A couple games that pops into my mind when thinking about this topic is Detroit Become Human, Oddworld Odyssey, and Nier Automata. Detroit Become Human explores the uprising of androids as they demand respect and equal treatment, seeking to be recognized as individuals rather than mere slaves devoid of autonomy. The game empowers players to make choices that shape the narrative, allowing them to be peaceful or take a more destructive path. In my opinion, Detroit does a good job of conveying the theme of oppression. The Oddworld series or franchise or games that I've never once played in my life, but from watching a bunch of videos and seeing the summary and synopsis of the games, at least for one of them, it doesn't really take a genius to know that oppression is a theme here. I mean, the synopsis of Oddworld's Abe's Odyssey literally stated that he's a Mudakan slave working for a factory that produces meat owned by the Glucon, only to find out that the meat produced are literally made from the Mudakan, which are, Abe's people. Hopefully I'm not butchering the words, but that is some real dark shit right there. And finally, Nier Automata is a game that focuses on the negatives and positives of humanity. The androids are created to look and act like humans. The machines, which are basically what the androids are or were at war against, finds humanity fascinating, and some tries to emulate common human behaviors and emotions. Shit, some of them became human, at least appearance wise. Nevertheless, even though machines and androids share a comparable, affection for humanity, the androids hate the machines with a passion because, to be honest, most of the machines, apart from a few, aren't really good. But from how the androids, especially 9S, speak about them, you can tell he despises the machines a lot. Even the ones that aren't bad or are trying to be friendly, he still acts, cold towards them. Those were just a few examples of how prejudice and oppression is told through a game story, whether it's on the nose or a bit more subtle. However, this made me want to take a deeper look on how Fromsoft approaches the topic of racism and, prejudice and oppression in their Souls titles. There are a lot of themes in the Souls games: death, rebirth, cycles, etc. However, the one that I see get overlooked a lot is the topic of racism. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. What are you talking about? I've never seen a character being racist in any of the Souls games. I'm sure you've heard of Gwyn, right? I mean, the guy hated dragons with a passion, and one day decided, man, you know what? I'm tired of these goddamn stone skin dragons taking our land and shit. Let's go teach them a goddamn lesson. I'm never doing that shit again, I'm sorry. But we're not gonna be talking about Gwyn just as yet. A lot of the Souls games usually have some type of group of people who went through oppression. Usually this is something that isn't really explained or mentioned up front, but if you're like me, an intellectual who actually reads a bunch of item descriptions and listen to cryptic dialogue from various NPCs instead of watching VOD video for lore explanations, then you would get it. So I wanted to go over some examples of how Fromsoft approaches the topic of racism in their title. Let's start with the most recent approach coming from Elden Ring. We're going to be talking about a group of people called the Omens. The Omens are a race or mutation of people in the Elden Ring universe who were born without grace, and they were also born with a deformity, having multiple horns protruding their bodies. Because of this, they were enslaved and also cursed not to being reborn from the earth tree after death. There are two kinds of omens. The regular ones who has their horns removed when they were born and turned into soldiers. This process oftentimes killed the newborn child, and the royal ones who get to keep their horns but are compelled to hide in the sewers. The birth of an omen seems unpredictable and can affect any child, like Marika's twins, Morgoth and Mohg. Despite Marika being a queen, they were forced to live in the sewers due to their omen deformity. The omens were viewed as abominations, and a group known as the Omen Killers hunted those who survived. These hunters wore masks that mimicked the unsettling visages haunting the omens in their dreams. Speaking of omen killers, let's talk about them for a little bit. As mentioned earlier, the omen killers were a group dedicated to hunting down omens. Their actions are notably harsh considering the only wrong thing the omens, ever committed was being born. And for that, the omen killers make it their sole duty to wipe them out. Like, talking about some hating ass shit. The omen killers are basically emotionless murderers that basically causes more misery for the omens in their already miserably and sad lives. The first of the omen killers was a perfumer named Rollo, and he basically made himself emotionless on purpose just so that he can carry out the task of hunting and slaughtering omens. Now, the two most popular or well-known omens in Elden Ring are Morgoth the Omen King and the Mohg the Lord of Blood. Both Morgoth and Mohg were twins, and their parents were Queen Marika the Eternal and Godfrey the First Elden Lord. Both parents, especially Marika, holds a lot of power not only for themselves but also over the capital of Leyndell. But even knowing she had power, she still sent both twins to be raised underground in the sewers. Now, I'm not sure if she did this out of shock and disgust based on their appearance or solely because the Greater Will wanted her to. Either way, both Morgoth and Mohg had a shitty life growing up in the sewers of Leyndell. However, both brothers reacted to their situation differently. Morgoth basically hated his own cursed blood on some Uncle Ruckus shit and tried his best to redeem himself for the Golden Order and the Greater Will, even though they despised omens. Because of this, Morgoth tries to prove his loyalty by protecting the Erd Tree and calling himself the last king of Leyndell, although keeping his appearance a secret. Now, Mohg on the other hand kinda said yeah, fuck all that. Mohg embraced his cursed blood and went to the Formless Mother, who is another outer god similar to the Greater Will but with far less amount of clout. The Formless Mother basically being the god of blood, and you know, Mohg having cursed blood, you get it. These two kinda hit it off and Mohg basically switched sides. Now, Mohg currently wants the Formless Mother to have as much power as the Greater Will or even more power, because with this he can bring upon a new dynasty. And some things happen after that to where Mohg basically ended up kidnapping and trying to marry his younger half brother that's cursed to always look like a child. Wait, what the fuck? In essence, both Morgoth and Mohg face significant challenges. While the Omen curse might not be labeled as a distinct race, the way the people in the lands between treat them gives it a racial dimension. Interestingly, the Omen curse had a different perception in ancient times, possibly during the age of the Crucible, when omens were regarded as almost divine beings. However, in the modern era of the Erd Tree, they are now seen as repulsive. I really like the way Fromsoft approaches this. Sure, both Mohgwyn and Morgoth are seen as the bad guys in our point of view, stopping us from reaching our goals, but after learning about them, you start to understand at least a little where they're coming from, except for, you know, Mohg wanting to marry his younger brother. Like, that shit is weird, bro. What the fuck? In any case, it's evident that both Mohg and Morgoth might have taken a different path if they received love from their family and the blessings of the Erd Tree, instead of being treated like garbage. Now, the next group I wanted to talk about is the Giants. Beginning with the Giants in Dark Souls 2, although they didn't face the same type of oppression or racism like the Omens in Elden Ring, their lands were still captured and conquered by a man called King Vendrick. Now, Vendrick was the king of Drang Lake, and the queen at the time, Nashandra, was just like, hey, you see those giants over there minding their business? Let's just take their land. And then Vendrick was like, yes, my queen. And he went to the giants' land and waged war against them and conquered the homeland, and also took a valuable item from them. Technically, it was us, the player, that killed the giant lord because, I don't know, time memory bullshit. But look, that doesn't mean we're racist or anything. Come on now. Vendrick and Nashandra initiating a war against the giants wasn't driven by the racism we typically understand today. It was more about power and control. However, I mentioned this because in essence it still qualifies as a race conflict. Vendrick took some giants as prisoners, subjecting them to all these experiments. He even harnessed their power to create golems. While not as extreme as what the Omens went through, this war significantly devastated the giants' homeland. I mean, again, some prisoners endured disturbing experiments, and sure, the giants caused havoc in Drang Lake, but to be fair, it all originated from King Vendrick influenced by Nashandra. This aspect mirrors racial conflict in history, where wars were often ignited against different races or ethnic groups due to factors like land or resources or some other stuff. And because of this, even after years have passed and the war is over, the people of the two groups might still hate each other because of what their ancestors, did. Now, the giants in Dark Souls 3 went through a different type of ill treatment. After Pontiff Sullivan took over on Orlando and basically helped fed Gwendolyn to Aldridge, he started to engage in numerous atrocities, including turning this once royal woman into his personal dancer and mutating her, mutating his knights into grotesque creatures, imprisoning one of Gwen's daughter, and also keeping the giants as slaves. You can even witness their suffering even before reaching an Orlando. As you can see, some giants were kept in the cathedral to carry out like heinous tasks. The way Pontiff probably saw the giants was like, oh hey, these guys are strong, let me just use them to do some weird dirty work like crushing people to death and feeding their remains to Aldrich. And they did this for years on top of years. No, I'm not saying that Sullivan's mistreatment of the giants was because he's racist. No, I think it's more so he comes off as an edgelord type of guy that would say something like, I'm not racist, I hate everyone equally, but I still thought that it would be good to mention them. And also, Sullivan needs a whole video for himself. That man is like straight up evil. Like he's probably the most evil like Dark Souls character. The last giant I wanted to talk about is Yhorm. In the capital where Yhorm resided, the citizens needed a new ruler and turned to him for assistance. Yhorm accepted the offer and assumed the role of ruler. However, not everyone really welcomed this change. Perhaps it was due to Yhorm, being a descendant of an old conqueror, or this might be, a bit of a stretch, but some might have held a prejudice against giants, perceiving them as somewhat dim-witted and lacking intelligence. It's kind of understandable to some extent why some people would think this, because to be fair, giants in the Dark Souls games are kind of like, they don't really talk a lot. Some people even theorize that they might be telepathic or whatever, especially the ones in Dark Souls 2, because they never talk at all. Except for the ancient dragon, and then again he talks to you with his mind. But I'm assuming because of this, some people in the capital hated the fact that Yhorm was their ruler, which is crazy because Yhorm tried his best as a ruler to please his people. He even gave them a weapon that could kill them if the time ever comes for it, just to be on their good side. But ultimately things didn't go well for Yhorm and his people due to some things happening with the profane flame turning some people into monsters, then Yhorm linking the flame thinking that would help, not knowing that that would cause even more damage to the capital. It's kind of sad. I feel bad for Yhorm. However, the type of prejudice targeted towards Yhorm seemed to be rooted in elitism. People thinking that they are superior to a certain person or a group due to their race or culture. In this case, some people probably thought that Yhorm is just a dim-witted giant that doesn't deserve to be in power, but only in it because they couldn't do any better. The next group I wanted to delve into is the dragons in the Dark Souls trilogy. From my understanding and recollection, Gwyn's beef with the dragons stemmed more from power struggle rather than outright prejudice. Seeking control over the lands governed by the everlasting dragons, Gwyn waged war against them with his army, even forming an alliance with one of the dragons himself, Seath the Scaleless. Now, Seath had a certain animosity against the dragons due to jealousy. They have scales that basically made them immune to a lot of stuff and basically making them immortal, and yet he was born without any. And for this very reason, he turned his back on his entire race or species, betraying them by forming an alliance with a man that hated them. But in reality, maybe Gwyn didn't hate the dragons too much because he was willing to team up with one. But at the same time, you could look at it as Gwyn thinking that Seath was, how can I put this, one of the good ones. After the war, Gwyn built Anor Londo and he gave Seath his own dukedom. With this, Seath was able to carry out experiments on how to make his very own skin durable as the dragons. So the type of prejudice that Gwyn had for the dragons seemed to be stemmed from wanting control and power, while Seath's problem with them seemed to be coming from a place of envy. Now my final example is humanity itself. Okay, so I'm going to be using the fandom wiki as reference and also things I remembered from playing the games and watching videos on this topic. The humans in Dark Souls were originally hollows and these zombie looking mofos. During the Age of the Ancients, Gwyn came to humans to assist him in his battle against the dragons, and they did. They crafted armor and weapons in the Abyss, but Gwyn didn't really like the fact that they were using powers that came from the Abyss itself, and placed a seal on the human knights. That's how the Ring Knights have the symbol or brand on their chest. After the war, Gwyn gifted the humans a place called the Ring City, but it was less of a gift and more of a way to contain them, since Gwyn seemed like he was probably, scared of their affiliation with the Abyss or their Dark Soul, and with the city he kept them at bay. Now sometime later, some of the humans left the city and went to different places and areas, and thousands of years later after that, Gwyn wanted to keep his Age of Fire going, so he sacrificed his own body to the flame to keep it burning some more. However, the flame helps to shackle humanity from being their true form. That's why as the fire fades, human starts to become more hollow. Once again, the motivation behind Gwyn's action could be attributed to various factors. A lot of people might say it was because of like his desire for control, or maybe it stemmed from the fear of the dark soul or the abyss. In truth, it could be a combination of both, and that's the interpretation that I lean towards more. This might not seem like typical oppression or prejudice, but Gwyn clearly wasn't too fond of the humans. I mean, similar to his relationship with Seath, he seems not to have a problem with working with them. However, he definitely doesn't trust them too much, due to the power of the dark soul that resides within them. Now, with the examples I've discussed, each of them can be described with just one word. In the case of the Omens, much of the ill treatment they experienced was rooted in lookism, which is described as prejudice or discrimination based on physical appearance, and especially physical appearance believed to fall short of societal notions of beauty. While not the perfect word, it came close enough to capturing what the Omens, went through. I mean, the Omens were mostly treated horribly due to their deformity, and yes, sure, a lot of the mistreatment may be rooted in the fact that they weren't given any grace by the Earth Tree, but let's be honest, if the Omens came out looking like Michael B. Jordan or Brad Pitt, most people would probably not care about them not having grace, and they would most likely not get targeted by omen killers. Giants and dragons were primarily targeted due to their pursuit of power. Gwyn aimed to seize control of the lands ruled by the dragons. The Chandra persuaded Vendrick to invade the giants' homeland because it's just another kingdom to conquer, and the giants in Dark Souls 3 experienced a form of slavery as Sullivan sought to showcase his dominance. Now for humanity, Gwyn's ethnocentrism towards them is basically rooted in the fact that he seemed like he was forcing his way of life onto the humans in a weird Dark Souls type of way. I mean, he basically put a brand on them, keeping them away from their true forms because he either thought he was protecting them, or it seems more like it was out of fear, which is what I'm going more towards. Even though technically the word ethnocentrism would fit Gwyn more, that itself was rooted in fear. Now for the individuals, Seath's hatred towards his own race was due to envy. You know this because, I mean, the game literally tells you, and the fact that he tries to replicate his own version of their scales for himself shows that jealousy definitely played a huge part. Yhorm's dislike from some of or most of his people probably stemmed from elitism. People in his town probably thought that a giant was not the best pick to be a ruler because, I don't know, they probably thought he wasn't smart enough. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the times the giants seem like chill people. They don't really act stupid or do anything stupid. It's just because the way they sound or talk may make them come off as like a child trying to like form words together or something. But again, I think it's mostly due to that giants don't talk like how maybe regular humans or people talk in the Dark Souls games. They probably communicate telepathically or some shit. Yhorm himself doesn't even seem to portray this type of dim-witted behavior. In conclusion, Fromsoft's approach to addressing racism in their games is intriguing. Beyond the Omens, they don't overtly depict racism and oppression, but rather subtly hint at its roots in jealousy, power, elitism, and all the other terms I've listed. This nuanced portrayal invites players to delve deeper into the narratives, raising questions about the nature of conflicts. Is the war against the giants a form of race war, sparked initially by Vendrick's action of being, a fucking simp? Stuff like that. And you might be saying that, bro, you're looking way too deep into this, and maybe I am, but personally I just see it as a somewhat interesting topic to cover, and isn't that what makes the lore of the Souls games interesting in the first place? Being able to speculate on different things using background details or various dialogues hinting at something. I don't know, but I really like doing that. And again, I really like how FromSoft handled these types of topics in their games, and that's what makes the Soulsborne world so interesting in the first place. They are able to make the lore of the worlds they create so rich to the point where a lot of stories take place in the background, and it's up to you to find out what went on and put your own guess onto why and how certain things happened.